It's time to talk about gasoline engines. The Vectra C has a wide variety of them: 1.6Z16Z 100 horsepower, 1.8Z18Z 122 horsepower. The base engines before restyling are naturally aspirated 1.6 and 1.8 liters, which trace their origins back to the 1990s. Simple and uncomplicated engines that sometimes stop showing signs of life due to ECU failure. The control units are installed on the motors themselves, so both shaking and temperature are transmitted to them. And their boards are soldered not on fiberglass, but on a ceramic substrate. These Simtex 71 blocks almost failed en masse. They were replaced with Textilite Simtex 71.1. Most likely, all the basic pre-restyling Vectras have already been cured. Therefore, all that remains is not to forget the timing belt every 60,000 kilometers, so as not to ruin these simple engines. By the way, they are equipped with hydraulic compensators. We have detailed reviews for both engines that are worth checking out to avoid any other troubles. If you carefully monitor these engines, they will easily and inexpensively cover more than 500,000 kilometers. 2.2 Z22SE 147 horsepower, 2.2 Direct Z22 155 horsepower. In the first few years, the Vectra C was equipped with a 2.2-liter engine, and then the injection was upgraded. The distributed injection was replaced with direct. Since birth, these engines have had problems with the life of the timing chain, its tensioner, and the balancer shaft chain. After 2010, resource parts appeared that made life much easier for those who chose 2.2-liter engines. True, every 150,000 kilometers you still need to listen and change. Experts advise never leaving cars with these engines parked in gear, only in the handbrake. Then the timing chain lasts much longer. Surprisingly, today the 2.2 direct engine is highly valued. Engineers have solved a bunch of unpleasant issues with injection. Craftsmen have found an approach to the injection pump. The standard Continental is replaced with a plunger pump from Renault, which works perfectly and for a long time on high-quality and well-refined gasoline, and the owner also needs to keep an eye on the swirl flaps. In engines with direct injection, they reduce the cross-section of the intake manifold channels to increase air speed. You cannot refuse them. Sometimes you will have to resolve issues with their wedging. If you ignore their malfunction, the valves can fly under the valves and pistons. Be sure to note that 2.2 engines are not averse to snacking on oil. A liter from replacement to replacement is normal for them. But if the bill is 2 to 3 or more liters, then owners often prefer to install a contract engine. 2.0 Turbo Z20NET 175 horsepower. A close relative of the 2.2-liter engines is the 2-liter turbo engine. A good engine, to which sub-engineers had a hand. The weak point is the chain. But after the improvements, the chain of a fresh revision lasts a really long time, and there is no tendency to eat oil in this engine. Available on Vectra C of any model year. 3.2 V6 Z32SE 211 horsepower, 2.8 V6 Turbo Z20NET, Z28NET 250, 280 horsepower. Vectra C also had petrol V6S. At first it was a 3.2-liter engine. Then it was replaced by a 2.8-liter turbo engine. These are related motors and very reliable. In essence, a well-maintained turbo Vectra is a decent car, fun, but gets better fuel economy. 1.6Z16 ZEP 105 horsepower, 1.8Z18XR 140 horsepower. The base engines for the restyled Vectra C are new 1.6 and 1.8-liter 4s. We have detailed reviews for both engines. The younger one has no phase shifters, no heat exchanger, and one might say, no problems. It has slightly troublesome twin-port flaps, a traditionally bursting membrane of the crankcase ventilation system, and the possibility of oil leakage from under the oil pump housing that appears with mileage. And the pump is located outside, screwed in front and driven from the crankshaft journal. About the Z18XR motor, about the most expensive and unpleasant in terms of consequences are the heat exchanger and rattling phase shifters. Smaller problems are the thermostat, crankcase ventilation valve, throttle valve heating tube. We are not talking about the modular ignition coil and oil leaks from under the valve cover. These are standard surprises of all Opel engines. Well, except that on V6 the coils are not modular. In general, today it seems that the optimal petrol engine for the Vectra C is a 2.2-liter or 2.0 turbo. If the engine is well maintained, there is a service history, and there is no oil burn, then you can enjoy it for a long time without major investments. The Vectra C has a lot of diesel engines. Let's start with the oldest. 2.0 DTi Y20DTH 101 horsepower, 2.2 DTi Y22DTR 125 horsepower. The 2.0 and 2.2 DTi engines are literally identical. They were developed by GM engineers, and that's where all their achievements in the diesel field ended. These engines are without common rail, with direct injection based on a radial injection pump. Available only on pre-facelift Vectra C, with proper maintenance, these are million-dollar engines. But they have many weak points, both in the fuel system and in mechanics. There are cases of crankshaft failure. These engines have fans, they even chip them up to 160 horsepower to make the Vectra more fun. They preventively change the crankshaft main bearings every 150,000 kilometers. This will take an hour and not in vain. It is also advised to avoid the original oil and use a higher quality one with a viscosity of 5W40. 1.9 CDTi Z19DTL 101 horsepower, Z19DT 120 horsepower, Z19DTH 150 horsepower. The 1.9 CDTi engine is much more interesting. Moreover, it is available in 3 power options. This is an Italian common rail engine from Bosch. It combines simplicity and reliability. Exactly. He literally has no problems. Unless in the 150 horsepower version you need to deal with the swirl flaps. On all 1.9 CDTIs, it is necessary to preventively change the fireproof washers under the injectors. In general, this turbo diesel will cover 500,000 or more kilometers with much less investment. True, along the way you will have to make a stop to replace the dual mass flywheel. 3.0 V6 CDTI Z30DT 177, 184 horsepower. The older turbo diesel on the Vectra C is a 3-liter V6. This is an Isuzu engine. And it's better to stay away from him. Not only is it complicated and expensive to maintain, but it doesn't go anywhere. But it also shamelessly throws away cartridges. Due to overheating, the cylinder liners in its block sag, after which gases begin to seep in the cooling system. Of course, even worse troubles arise. Antifreeze pours into the engine and cylinder. After such adventures, the owners changed the 3-liter Isuzu engine to something more traditional. By the way, we also have a review of this motor on the channel. F17 5-speed manual transmission. Let's move on to mechanical transmissions. With 1.6 and 1.8-liter engines, a 5-speed gearbox is installed. Box F17. For a heavy Vectra C, it is frankly rather weak. Its first total breakdowns with the destruction of the differential, when torn-off satellites pierce its body, appeared at runs of up to 50,000 kilometers. There have been few such serious cases, but in general, if the F-17's mechanics survive 200,000 kilometers, it will be great. To extend its life, you need to update its oil every 50,000 kilometers and eliminate slipping. Also, its backstage is not long-lasting, but a repair kit or periodic lubrication of the mechanism helps. F23 5-speed manual transmission. Together with the 2.2-liter gasoline engines, another 5-speed gearbox works. Transmission F23. She usually doesn't create any problems. M32 6-speed manual transmission. The 6-speed manual transmission together with 2.2 direct engines and 8-valve 1.9 CDTi engines is designated M32. You shouldn't relax with this transmission either. It can hum with the bearings, but you can extend its life, again, by changing the oil and increasing its level. F46 speed manual transmission, with turbocharged gasoline engines, and with the most powerful diesel engines, with 16-valve 1.9 CDTi and V6, another 6-speed engine is installed. Manual transmission F40. Everything is fine with her, no problems arise. The Vectra C was equipped with Aisin hydromechanical automatic transmissions, and there was no flexible choice of engines to pair with them. And yes, the impressions of the automatic Vectra were spoiled by the quality of the radiators, through which antifreeze entered the built-in ATF heat exchanger, which led to the death of the transmission. AF23, Aisin AW5550SN 5-street automatic transmission. For example, a 2-pedal Vectra C with a simple engine is only with a 2.2-liter engine. In this case, the AW5550SN transmission is docked to the engine. Not the most durable Japanese box, but not the worst either. In the early years, it managed to cause trouble due to dubious reliability not only on Opel cars. It needs regular ATF updates at least every 50,000 kilometers, and a separate radiator for cooling wouldn't hurt at all. AF33, Aisin 55551SN 5-street automatic transmission. A stronger and improved version is available with a 3.2-liter V6, as well as 2.2 DTi and 3.0 V6 CDTI diesel engines. The recommendations are the same: change the oil and install a radiator. When purchasing and using, you pay attention to strong kicks both when changing gears and when switching from parking to forward or reverse. If kicks are present, then you need to prepare for expensive repairs. Changing the oil and replacing solenoids is unlikely to solve the problem. AF40TF80SC 6-speed automatic transmission. The more interesting, advanced and durable Aisin went to the 2.8 turbo, 150 horsepower 1.9 CDTi, and updated 3.0 V6 CDTI engines. There are far fewer problems with it. It lasts more than 250,000 kilometers. But the previous recommendations also apply to it. We change the ATF and install an external radiator. Restyled Vectra with a 1.8-liter engine are often also found in a 2-pedal version. But in this case, the gears are switched by a robotic transmission. The branded Easytronic is an F17 box with automated gear shifting and clutch release. The only argument against the robot is its sluggishness in the form of pauses when changing gears. The rest is nothing but advantages. Do not laugh. It is extremely repairable. All spare parts for the Vectra robot are suitable from other Opel models and are inexpensive. It can be serviced and repaired literally in the field. Approximately every 150,000 kilometers you will need to change the brushes in the electric motor or the clutch actuator. Every 15,000 kilometers you need to change the hydraulic fluid in the clutch drive. It uses regular .4 brake fluid. You need to pump out the old one dry with a syringe and fill in the new one. With this type of maintenance, the clutch master cylinder and release bearing last a very long time. In rare cases, teeth are cut off from the driven gear of the clutch actuator. In this case, it is easier to replace it with a new one. In general, the Easytronic robot is not as scary as it might seem. All modifications of the Vectra C, with the exception of versions with a turbocharged 2.8 V6, are equipped with an electric power steering pump. Over time, the electric motor shaft seal begins to leak working fluid inside to the electronic components. After this, the entire electronic unit fails. Before or simultaneously with this, a hum may appear. It indicates worn shaft bearings. Bearings and seal are sold separately. With sufficiently skillful hands, you can sort out the power steering electric pump at home. If the electrical part does not work, then in addition to errors and lack of gain, various glitches appear. For example, the battery may die overnight. By the way, due to a weak battery, a working power steering pump may fail. Over time, oil seeps from under the fluid reservoir. You can deal with it using any convenient means, even with sealant. You can install a used power steering electric pump, but you will have to attach it with proprietary software and sometimes resolve minor issues regarding the correct binding of its control unit. Some Vectra C units are unpleasantly glitchy in terms of electrics. The symptoms are different, from a weak starter with a completely dead battery to the switching off of the instrument panel or the power steering pump. In this case, it is worth inspecting and cleaning the negative terminals. Moreover, it is worth inspecting not only the connections under the hood to the body and to the starter, but also even the cons and the rear lights. All oxides must be gotten rid of. Additional mass can be added. In recent years, Vectras have often had problems with the stovepipes. They either burst or leak through the connections due to tired O-rings. It is worth keeping a close eye on the pipes, especially if you are on long trips in the winter. The generator and air conditioning compressor last a long time. Everything about them is standard. Another weak point that appears with mileage is the play of the internal CV joints. Appears in all Vectra C transmission configurations. In the manual transmission version, a jolt may be felt when starting off. The stronger the play, the greater the chance of oil leakage through the oil seals of the transmission gearbox. The oil level drops, jeopardizing the health of the transmission. There have even been cases of destruction of differential pinions. The front suspension of the Opel Vectra C is McPherson type. The support bearings of the shock absorber struts are poorly protected from dirt, so they begin to creak literally every spring. The original support bearing will cost $60. Good replacements are half that price. Stabilizer links last for several years. The original costs more than $100. Front arm parts can last more than 100,000 kilometers. The ball joint is not sold separately from the lever. You will have to pay more than $300 for the original complete lever. The loaded rear silent block is sold separately for $100. There are plenty of substitutes. Prices are 3 times lower. The rear suspension has 4 levers, each connected to the subframe and hub with 1 or 2 silent blocks. So when it comes time to shake up the Vectra C's rear suspension, it's a pretty big deal. The silent blocks of the upper boomerang move the least here. The original lever assembly will cost $400. Of course, today no one buys it. They either choose non-original levers, no more than $110 a piece, or repress silent blocks. There is also a solution that involves selecting silent blocks from, for example, Subaru or Insignia and filing the seat. But why bother with this nonsense if there are non-original silent blocks for $10 to $15 of the correct size? All other levers are also available at reasonable prices. There are plenty of non-original silent blocks. The original upper control arm is $110. The remaining levers are the lower one for the spring and the longitudinal one. You don't have to buy them assembled. Their silent blocks are sold separately. The original large trailing arm bushing will cost $80. The lower hub silent block will cost more than $100. The internal silent block of the spring-loaded lever has to be selected only from a non-original one, and even polyurethane substitutes are available. You need to choose non-original silent blocks only from good manufacturers, otherwise you will have to climb into the rear suspension every year. For mileages exceeding 200,000 kilometers, a thorough overhaul of the rear brake calipers will be required. They turn sour, the brake pads begin to compress the disc poorly, plus the built-in parking brake mechanism will add problems in the form of non-retractable pads. It is better to preventively restore the rear calipers than to later crawl to the service station with a jammed wheel. Wheel bearings last 200,000 kilometers or less if the Vectra C is fitted with wheels larger than 17 inches in diameter. The bearings here are part of the hubs. The prices are appropriate. $850 for the front and about $400 for the rear. There are a lot of non-originals on sale, prices are 4 times lower. By the way, ABS sensors are built into the front hubs. If the left sensor malfunctions, the automatic or robotic transmission begins to malfunction. One aftermarket manufacturer offers front ABS sensors separately for $40. Corrosion to holes was a problem for Opels, and this problem was overcome in the third generation of Vectra. The body of this car does not rust or rot. Corrosion can only appear in areas of body repair after a serious accident, or where sand and stones manage to break through the galvanizing. The roof panel above the windshield also sometimes becomes covered with red dots if the paint chips are too deep. The body of the Vectra is well painted. However, over time, the paint chips at the corners of body panels and where it is exposed to sand and reagents. For example, on the sills and edges of the wheel arches. It would be a good idea to inspect the bottom in places where the factory anti-gravel mastic has come off. There may be red spots that develop into rotten corrosion. The basic halogen headlights of the Opel Vectra C are frankly blind. Even when new they were weak, and with age, when the reflector fades and the glass becomes cloudy, everything becomes even worse. The Vectra was also equipped with xenon headlights. A xenon lamp shines brighter, but costs more and often lasts much less than a halogen. Especially if moisture gets into the headlight, and this happens often because the tightness of the Opel headlight housing is weak. The ignition unit is also not the smallest expense item. And yes, the factory xenon is only for low beam. Adaptive xenon headlights AFL are rare, i.e. with rotating lenses. They have a separate list of problems. The sensors will die, the left headlight unit will get wet, the wiring will crack, or the servo will jam. One of the lenses may become skewed, i.e. will get stuck in the left or right position. The AFL system indicates malfunctions by turning on the corresponding indicator on the instrument panel. In some cases, recalibration of this mechanism, launched by a proprietary scanner, helps. Let us add that if the onboard computer reports burnt out light bulbs in the lighting devices, but the lamps themselves burn normally, then take the time to thoroughly clean the contacts in the electrical connectors. The non-standard resistance of the light device makes the ECU think that it is not working correctly. As Vectra C ages, the mirror elements on the exterior mirrors sometimes fall off. A kind of proprietary feature of Opel, the same situation is on the Astra H. It is possible that the previous owners have already glued the mirrors securely. It's probably worth shaking the mirror glass sometimes. It's better to let it fall into your hands than onto the asphalt. Then glue them tightly. Typically, the trapezoidal wipers on cars last a very long time, but on the Vectra C it throws up surprises when running over 300,000 kilometers. Usually the essence of the problem is that the plastic hinge joints that connect the servo drive and the wiper rods burst. If the hinges break, one or both wipers will stop swinging. It happens that the hinges warp, then the wipers work slowly. In general, there is no need to stand on ceremony with a worn-out trapezoid, because a good non-original one costs about $40, and an original one costs about $100. Over time, the trunk button will require attention. It will stop working every once in a while or stop responding altogether. The button itself is not to blame for this, i.e. the contact closure, and the lever that presses its rod. The problem is easily remedied by adding, shall we say, material to the push lever. When you remove the button, you will understand everything yourself. From time to time, the brake lights on the Vectra C stop working, and only in the headlights. As a rule, the reason is in the so-called rec module, located in the trunk in the fuse box. Due to problems in this unit, other devices in the rear of the car, for example, the trunk lock, may also turn off. The key chips in the module simply burn out. New keys can be selected according to the markings and soldered in place of the burned ones. You can also buy a used rec module, but such electronic devices are not simply connected to Opel. You need not only special software, but also a code from both devices, i.e. from the burned out one and the working one. The interior of the Vectra C has been pleasing with its quality for a long time and retains its good appearance. However, the covering of the handles of the door panels often peels off, and the fabric upholstery of the ceiling often sags, not in the center, but along the edges of the roof on its bends. Over time, the bottom strip of the blinds in the air duct deflector stops opening, its rod inside breaks off. This small nuisance can be corrected, the frame from the blinds is removed, and then the cracked rod can be glued and reinforced with staples, and the drums near the buttons on the restyled steering wheel, they are also called knobs, wear out over time, the rubber coating peels off from them, and the appearance becomes untidy. The craftsmen have found a way out. The panels with the steering wheel and knob buttons can be removed and the remnants of the old coating can be wiped off. And instead of it, a piece of black computer cable is glued on. It has the necessary ribbing and does not rub off. If the drum becomes warped or stops working, it must be removed and, accordingly, the broken mounting frame must be soldered or the contacts must be cleaned of dirt. Well, if the standard steering cable breaks, the buttons on the steering wheel will stop working and an error will appear for the airbag. Heated seats on Opel are not very durable and usually stop working due to broken threads. In principle, if you remove the casing, then finding and soldering breakpoints in the threads will not be difficult. A proprietary sore of the Vectra C, which appears on literally all cars, is the incorrect operation of the knobs on the climate control unit. They either don't work at all or work incorrectly, they jump to several positions at once. The problem is the same on both pre-restyling and restyled ventilation controls. The problem can be resolved very simply. This remote control needs to be removed and disassembled. There are no difficulties with this. Then you need to solder the contacts between the regulators and the electronic board. If there are complaints about the operation of the fan, such as working only at high speed and complete inactivity at low speed, or the fan turns on only after hitting the panel on the right or driving over bumps, then you will have to remove it and, the most budget-friendly solution, change the brushes of the electric motor. Sometimes hot air starts blowing from one of the air ducts. In this case, during diagnostics an error will be detected in one of the exhaust temperature sensors in the ventilation system. The faulty sensor needs to be replaced. It is located right in the air duct. If clicks and rustling sounds appear in the depths of the instrument panel on the right, this indicates a breakdown of one of the switching flaps in the ventilation system. In recent years, play in the steering mechanism has begun to be noticed on the Vectra C. In this case, you should immediately look at the lower crosspiece of the steering shaft. This is the crosspiece that is located immediately above the steering rack. The original crosspiece is sold together with the shaft and this purchase is unreasonably expensive. You can buy a non-original crosspiece, ST1638, for $10 and even change it yourself. Over time the ignition switch on the Vectra C begins to jam. It doesn't wear out so much as it gets dirty. For prevention or at the first symptoms of jamming, the lock should be removed, cleaned and lubricated. You can disassemble its larva down to its secrets, but take care of the correct assembly of the secrets. Sketch out their combination in advance. Let's quickly talk about the SIM module. This is the steering column switch module. He is also responsible for the central locking. So, only on the 2002 Vectra with the XR marking does it malfunction. Manipulation of the levers does not cause any response. The central locking does not respond to the remote control, plus random errors appear on the CAN bus. This module cannot be repaired. It was replaced with a used one or a new one. Sometimes there are cars where the owner has richly replaced the SIM module with a problem-free restyled one. But such a modification entails the installation of a restyled steering wheel, radio, screen and climate control unit. Otherwise, none of this will work on an old machine with an updated SIM. By the way, the central displays also cause problems. On old orange-black ones, hairs appear that indicate the layers of the screen are coming apart. If you need to get rid of them, you will have to change the screen. And on the updated color screen, entire columns of pixels disappear. This is a problem with the cable. Let us add that if the cruise control on the Vectra C stops turning on, then the problem may be not only in the SIM module, but also in the clutch pedal sensor. A systemic problem in the Opel Vectra C is the bursting wiring of the rear doors. The wires break off in the rubber corrugations from the openings to the doors. In general, if something in the rear doors stops working, then you need to take care of this problem as soon as possible, because there are unpleasant cases of short circuits. There are repair kits for repairing broken wires. You can simply connect the broken wires with sleeves or in another reliable way. Sometimes the coolant reservoir requires attention, rarely, but there are cases of tank cracking. If the onboard computer reports that the coolant level has dropped, but in reality everything is fine, then look carefully into the tank. Most likely, the float has fallen off. In this case, you will have to replace the tank with a new one.